to their futures. Soldiers speak out.
And tonight we have a very different situation. Mark Fleming, who is with me, is normally in the control room, but he is also with me because we are two of the independent accredited VA claims agents that work out of Coffee Strong. And tonight our topic happens to be veterans benefits. And so I wanted to introduce you, Mark, because rarely do they get to see you because you're in the control room.
It's different being out here than being in the other room. But this is an important topic, something Dennis and I have been doing for, what, about 5 years now?
Almost 5 years now.
And things have changed considerably in those 5 years, particularly this past year. So we'd like to talk a little bit about that and about the process in general, some of the things that we've learned.
One of the things that we do is on Fridays, we volunteer our time at Coffee Strong, which is off of exit 122 near Lakewood, Washington, just at the gates of Joint Base Lewis McChord. And Coffee Strong is a GI-owned coffee shop that provides information on a number of events, including
GI rights, conscientious objection,
discharge upgrades,
also assists military with processes like discharges, the discharge process, as well as med boards. So there's a lot of information there. Our area in particular is veterans.
And the reason that we wanted to share the information tonight is some of you watching may be active duty or recent veterans, and you wondering, how do I go about getting veteran benefits? Well, there are 3 sources that you can use, and Mark, why don't you tell us at least one of those sources, and I'll jump in on another maybe.
Well, one of the sources is you can apply yourself. I mean, there's a whole series of, there's a lot of information available. You can get the forms online, you can and fill them out and send them in. If you're not familiar with it, it can be daunting, so you might want to try the second course, which is?
And the reason that you don't want to necessarily go by yourself is a fully developed claim has certain information items in it, and we will talk about that. But the second one is, most likely you've come across a veterans service organization, such as the DAV or the Veterans Foreign War. There's a number of them.
Vietnam Veterans of America.
Exactly, and they all have an appointed service officer whose training sometimes is quite good. Other times they were appointed, they haven't the training, they try to help, but they miss a lot of things too.
Yeah.
So that brings us up to the third way that the Veterans Administration has authorized.
And that's by using an accredited claims agent or even a private attorney. There's some attorneys that specialize in it. The difference is that when you go to an attorney is you have to pay them. We do this at Coffee Strong on a volunteer basis at no charge to the veteran. So, and other agents may do the same thing. So there's a variety of ways you can do this.
A lawyer really can't charge a veteran, though, until
they've been denied.
And so we really wonder, how hard is that office going to work on behalf of the veteran? And one of the things that we do is work very hard to help a veteran file a claim. And when we file claims for the veteran and help them, we wanted a fully developed claim. And Mark, let's tell our viewing audience, what does fully developed mean?
Well, a fully developed claim is one where you say that here's all the information you need to make the decision. And you submit that, and they will process it that way. One of the problems with the VA process has always been is people have filed information piecemeal. And if the VA comes and says it's incomplete, then suddenly your file gets put on the bottom and they go to the next one. So putting everything in all at once at the same time means you're not going to have that kind of a delay.
It also means that we've given the VA all the information that they need in order to call the veteran in to see how disabling is that particular injury. So they don't have to go and get the service medical records or the other statements or anything. They have what they need to make a decision.
We've already gotten that for them. And one thing to keep in mind about this process, when you're dealing with, talking about a veteran's compensation claim, there are really three things you need to know about that. One is you have to have a current diagnosis of some condition. For example, PTSD or sleep apnea, something that's going on now, and you have a documented diagnosis. So that's the first thing.
And that diagnosis, though, can't be just from anyone who says, "Oh, well, this person has so and so."
Right. It has to be from a competent professional, either medical doctor, psychologist or psychiatrist.
And that psychologist or psychiatrist who may have a counseling practice is not the same as some very qualified mental health, social MSW credentialed people. The VA requires a doctorate in clinical psychology if it's in the area of mental health, such as PTSD.
So the one thing any good advocate should be doing is making sure that when you are getting this information, you're going to the right person to get that diagnosis. So now you've established, yes, you have this condition. So the second thing you need is some kind of event during your military service that led to that condition. And this can be anything. Combat could lead to PTSD. You could hurt your shoulder playing basketball and ultimately have a claim for that because that happened while you were in the military.
Could be a training accident that you were just in for a few weeks.
Yeah. So you have an event, you have a diagnosis. And the third thing is there has to be a logical connection, what we call a nexus, between the current condition and that event. So those three things come together and say, yes, you have a compensable condition.
And that nexus is best if you can get the doctor who gave you the diagnosis to say it is more likely than not that this condition happened during, and will date it as such,
right.
Particularly if you can show that injury is in your service medical records.
That's the gold standard. One of the problems that we encounter is some of the veterans that we're seeing have been out of the service for 40 years. So getting those records can be difficult. Trying to put this together can be difficult. It's not impossible. We've had several cases of Vietnam veterans who've come in well after the fact and put in for PTSD, and we've been able to document that and get a successful claim.
And one of the ways that we've been able to document that, if it was not in the service medical record, there's a thing called a buddy statement. And what is a buddy statement?
Well, a buddy statement can be from the people that knew you in the service. It can be people that knew you before you were in the service and know you now and can say, here's what he was like before, here's what they're like now. It can be from a family member. One of the things important about a buddy statement is it really has to be their observations. They can't say, Mark has PTSD because they're not qualified to make that diagnosis. But they can say, well, I knew Mark before he went in service and he was quite normal. And ever since he came out, he's never stopped talking about Vietnam.
Or he doesn't want to go out to the mall with me to go shopping.
Right.
So he avoids crowds. Or he wakes up at night screaming.
Right.
And it's hard to get sleep. Or we have to have separate rooms.
And that's where having family members are especially good for this. They can provide that documentation, that additional documentation to supplement what the medical professional says.
And one of the statements that they need to say on behalf of the veteran, besides saying their relationship to the veteran and how they know, heard, observed, is I hereby certify that the information I have given is true to the best of my knowledge and belief.
Yeah.
Because, that person is not qualified, as you mentioned, Mark, to say this unless they are.
Yeah.
And we've had some.
In which case we're getting a formal opinion.
We're getting a real formal opinion, true. And where is best to get it? If you are in the service now, find that person who was with you when this happened.
Exactly.
If you were out on patrol and something happened and you're still in contact with that person, or if you are in a holding unit of some sort and that person was with you, get their emails. Now, Mark and I served during the years that Vietnam occurred, and the last thing we wanted to do is keep in contact with anything that reminded us of our service. At least that's my story. But it is in your best interest to follow up with that information and get them to write something on your behalf.
And that's very challenging if you're a veteran who's been out of the service for a considerable amount of time. For people who are still in the service, who are just out, now is the time, and you're thinking about a claim, now is the time to start making those contacts because you will need that.
Sometimes you may need to be nice to your ex because your ex-spouse can be the person who can write the best statement for you, like, oh yes, this is what happened that led to our separation or divorce.
Exactly.
And
we've
that's
had some
a
of
great
that.
buddy statement.
Yeah. So not exactly a buddy, but someone who is very knowledgeable about your behavior and condition.
Now, let me give you an example of a buddy statement. Mark, we get a person who says they're having sleep deprivation issues, yawning, they're snoring back and forth, and someone says, you may have sleep apnea. Well, sleep apnea usually doesn't show up in the service medical records that you can get. Unless you did go through a sleep study while you're in the service. And I've seen some now at Madigan that have gone through that. And what we tell a person is you need a buddy statement from someone that could verify that, oh yeah, you had a great amount of snoring going on, yawning, falling asleep, hard time paying attention. Those are often characteristics of sleep apnea. And if you do then go through the diagnosis of going through a sleep study, you tell that sleep therapist that, oh yeah, I've had a lot of issues with people telling me snoring. Get a buddy statement from the person saying, oh yeah, we put Mills in the other barracks because he kept us awake at night. We tried to use earplugs, but you know, the window still rattled with his snoring. This is important because sleep apnea is a 50% disability claim. And the key thing to show that this happened in the service is to say, yes, I had sleep episodes in the service, and I didn't go through a sleep study, but I can get a statement from people that knew me. We had people that would come home on leave, and I even got statements from their teenage children that, oh yeah, Dad's home, no one's going to sleep now. And so the buddy statement becomes a very important statement to there. But where would they get their service medical records? Because sometimes when you're discharged, you don't land up with a lot of medical records.
Well, the first thing is to try to get, if you're in the service, you should try to take them with you. And I've heard people say, well, sometimes it's not available when I'm discharged. And I'm not entirely sure how that works, but if you can walk out with copies of your records, that's the best thing. Next, if you don't have them or you didn't get them 20 years ago when you got out of the service, you can order them from the National Archives. There's a form you can fill out and fax it in, and they will send you your medical records.
Actually, that form is called Form 180.
Right.
So even if you Google, and we'll have that information on the board now as you're watching, is the Form 180, and that goes to the National Archives, and you can request information, and they will send you everything that they have.
Which sometimes isn't a whole lot. There are other options. Like we had a veteran who sent those records, and they sent almost a minimal amount, and they said, well, you need to write the Army personnel records, and we did that, and we got some more, but it's still not incomplete. So the best thing is if you can take them with you, that would be ideal.
One of the things that we do at Coffee Strong is we have a fax number that we use and we send off to the National Archives, and I'll put that fax number on the board now. That is where you can actually fax the information saying, I would like my military records, my personnel records, Health records?
And service medical records,
Yes.
and get everything you can. And then along with that, and particularly if you're someone who has had a claim before and you're coming in to either increase that or put in a second claim, then we would also want to get your VA records. And we can request that from the regional office where those records are held. So really, between the service medical records and VA records, if there are any, it can give us a pretty good idea of what's available, what they've seen before, how they've decided it, and build a case from there.
We know that many of our viewing audience are not within the area that we service. We're at American Lake Veterans Hospital, and you can actually go in to the records section and request your own records, or
Well, you can only get your medical records from
that's only
American
the
Lake.
medical records.
And that's your VA, yeah.
That's the VA treatment records. Now, the one thing that we should clarify for our viewing audience is the VA is an unusual administration. It has a treatment side, that is your health side, but it also has the benefits side. Strangely enough, the two don't talk well together. And that's where sometimes getting a hold of those treatment records, they are making diagnostic statements. And we can use those diagnostic statements along with your current diagnosis to say, yes, you do have this particular one, and more than likely was tied to your service records.
So having as much information as we can get allows us to put together this fully developed claim. And our experience has been with when you're doing a fully developed claim, it will go faster. In the past year, we've had, I don't know, about 2 or 3 claims where we put in, and it's gone in like under 6 months, which is lightning speed for the VA.
Well, a matter of fact, just recently, Mark, in filing the fact that I would represent the veteran, we said that an independent accredited VA claims agent could represent you. Mark and I are 2 out of, we think, 7 in the state of Washington, and 2 of us work out of Coffee Strong. There is a form 2122A. It's a VA form saying that we will represent you because we've gone through the testing to become accredited for that. I filed that a month ago and got written documentation that I was this veteran's claims agent. That's probably the fastest I've ever seen a response. So we are seeing a bit of an improvement.
Overall, we've seen increased speed on the claims. What we're not seeing is any increase on the appeals, which can drag out for years. I have one now I'm in my 5th year.
Now, we just recently had an officer, an Air Force officer, medically retired, got his back compensation check because he was appealing clear back to when he had filed, even before he saw us. And it was in the tens of thousands of dollars tax-free thing because it was back to the date that he filed. Which, speaking now, is things have changed since you and I have started 5 years ago. So how do we preserve this earliest date so that they can get a back compensation
And what
check?
Dennis is talking about is the effective date. So when VA awards you compensation, there is an effective date, and it's usually based on when you filed. So if you come in and file, and we put a claim in, if we put a claim in today, it would be, the effective date would be July 1st. But if it takes them 3 years to decide, they're going to pay, and they award you a compensation, they're going to pay you all the way back. And what you want to do is get that date in earliest. And it used to be you could just write them on the back of a napkin and say, I want to file a claim. You can no longer do that.
We used to call that an informal claim letter, and we would file that all the time.
Yeah. Now, I guess about 2 months ago, the VA came out with some new procedures, and they now have what is called an intent to file a claim for compensation. It's the VA form. Yes, I have the right one here. It's the VA form 210966. And basically, all you do is fill it out and say, I'm seeking compensation. Here's my name, my basic information and mailing address, and that's it. You don't even have to tell them what you're...
And the VA doesn't even know what you're filing for with this.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, it can be for compensation or it can be for a pension as well. And
Yeah.
we've helped some people apply for pensions, basically low income, over age 62.
There are also survivors' pensions.
Survivors' pensions. So this is the same form, and the VA just says, okay, you are going to file shortly with us. How long do they have before you send them in what we hope is a fully developed claim then?
You have a year from the time you send this in. So that allows us to build a case. So if you come into Coffee Strong and say you want to file a claim or upgrade a claim, then the first thing we do is we'll send in this form for the new claim. There's also a form for increasing your compensation, and we'll send that in to lock in the date and then start building the case.
We fax it in, but we've also are known to send that certified mail return receipt requested.
And we can fax it in. I'm enough of an old school, and I'm kind of suspicious of government agencies, so I like to have a physical receipt. I don't really trust that fax form.
Well, and you've been nicknamed the bureaucratic gorilla for a reason.
That's right.
So we encourage you, when you do visit with us, to file this intent to file. That gives you time to collect the information. And so if you're in the service now, now's the time to start collecting. If you know that you're going to be out in a short period of time before you ETS, get as much documentation as you can. Then when you come in, we typically ask, what is it that we can do for you? And you may not even know at the time. But we have a document too that we use to tell us a little more about what happened to you while you're in the service.
Yeah, because it's quite likely you come in thinking, well, I want to make a claim for this. But you might actually have a variety of issues. Given the circumstances of military service, a lot of things can happen. So you start going through, we call the form is called a head-to-toe form.
For a reason.
And literally it starts at your head and, okay, talking about all parts of your body, how does it function, what pain do you have, that sort of thing. You get an idea of where you have problems.
And how limiting is that to you today as a result of this service-connected injury? And that's the key thing that we're looking for.
And then, so going from that, we can look and see, well, you could file 12, 15 claims. We don't encourage you to do that simply because filing 12 or 15 claims is a lot of work. And essentially, we're your advocates, but we're really not the ones that, we fill out the paperwork and submit it. But the veteran is the one who's going to have to pull this stuff together, have to go out and get the buddy statement. So we like to encourage people to think about what's most problematic,
and what's most important to you.
Yeah. And let's go for that. Get that put together, and then you can always amend the claim. You can always say, in addition to what you've already approved, we can always add another condition.
Yes, indeed. And matter of fact, that's when we like to go through the head to toe and say, when you filled out these 3 things, we've got that going now. You've received your letter back from the VA giving you the rating, and we say, do you agree with that rating, or do you think there should be more? If you think it should be more, then we will appeal that rating. But there are some things on your VA rating that's real interesting. Like if they rated some things and they said 0%, 0% doesn't literally mean 0. It just means it's not disabling to the point today that it would limit you from gainful employment. But
it's connected to your service, and should it become worse and should it become limiting, then it is compensable.
And we have done this over the last 5 years of saying, let's look at these 0% or 10% or so, and then how do they get it upgraded, if you will? What process do they do to change that rating?
And essentially, it's very similar to what you do for a new claim, but you don't have to prove the service connection. At this point, you're already service connected for a condition, so it's really a matter of getting an evaluation of what the current condition is. So you would go in and say, my condition is worsened, I would like you to be evaluated. If it comes back and say, yes, it is worse, then they would rate you at a higher percentage.
Now, sometimes people have had their rating changed and changed downwards.
That's right.
In which case we say, oh, was this outsourced? It wasn't a VA comp and pension doctor, and many times that's been the case. A former outsourced group is owned by the military industrial complex, so it's in their best interest probably to downgrade it as much as possible. But then we say, if you can, get a qualified physician, doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, even if it costs you, because sometimes you may be looking at $300 to $800 or more monthly forever, if you get that one fee that you can pay for. If not, you can simply say, I want to be called in to be reevaluated for such, and then you take your chances again to see, has this changed?
And probably if you have an option of a family physician or any kind of healthcare provider that you've dealt with over the years, that's a very good person to use because they have knowledge of your condition, of your health.
As a matter of fact, there is a form called a DBQ, a Disability Benefits Questionnaire. And
actually, there are about 20 of them, aren't there?
Yeah, and there should be one except for PTSD of all things.
Oh, there's not one for PTSD?
No. But, let's say if it was knees, or back. What's the one that we hear almost all the time? My back.
Right.
Okay, so you can use this questionnaire form to, you may have a health benefits now through your employer or wherever, and you choose to use that.
And a lot of this has to do with how the VA is trying to restructure the process to speed it up. In the past, there were a lot of, like what I would call informal communications, letters. Now they're trying to standardize everything so that they can, and also go digital so that they can have electronic records. So that's why they've started introducing some of these new forms. It's caused some problems with some veterans, particularly older veterans, because you have to be able to have access to the internet to get these forms. In fact, there is a place, and Dennis, you can put that up as well, va.gov. There's a whole where you can search for the appropriate forms. But essentially, if you're coming into us, we can tell us what you're looking for. We can point you in the right direction.
Well, they have filled out this intent to file, and we faxed that off, we mailed that off, but now comes okay, you come in the next time and you're bringing in what we've asked you to find, the file showing that this happened, your current diagnosis, and how those two are connected, the nexus. And so what is that next step that they're going to need to do?
I mean, the next step is to send in another form. And that's called the 21526EZ, and this is for what we call a fully developed claim, and it's very simple. It just simply has the basic information and says, here are the disabilities that I wish to claim, and that's pretty much. And also, where do you want the money deposited?
Yep.
Because it all has to all be electronic. So this is a cover sheet, and the typical claim that I do is this is going to be backed up with a fair amount of documentation. The buddy statements, the doctor statements, your own statement.
Please see the service medical record on such and such a date.
And I typically send this in with a cover letter saying, I'm filing this form with all these attachments. I want to make it as simple as possible for the VA.
Now, there is another form, and I hate to say we're saying forms, but we're talking with the Veterans Administration now, which is a statement in support of the claim, and that's a Form 21-4138, and that's for each area, each disability that you're filing, and this is for your opportunity to do basically, and it states here, the following statement is made in connection with a claim for benefits in the case of the above named veteran. And so this is your opportunity to say, this is what happened to me and how disabling it is.
Right. And also what we often do with that is we will use that form, but then we'll say, see attached statement, because you've written out a long letter. And you can do this online. You can fill it out. It's sometimes, if I've done that, but sometimes I also, if a veteran gives me a statement, I just say, see the attached statement.
Now, there are some times that we help veterans in making these statements, and that's in the area where you have post-traumatic stress. And sometimes telling of the event that caused this can re-trigger you in that. And so we often will say, if you're coming into Coffee Strong, we can help write this letter for you. We also have the power of attorney as independent claims agents, so we can almost write that letter on your behalf.
Yeah, and what we'll do is sit down with you and talk you through it, depending on how agitated it will make you, particularly when you're talking PTSD. It may take a while. In some cases, I had one veteran that took me about a year for him to get a statement. And he wrote it out finally and brought it back, and I critiqued it and made some suggestions about how to tighten it up. Very often, particularly when you're writing this, maybe it will go through several iterations. And one of the problems, particularly with PTSD or any of the mental health issues, is now you're reliving it. And it's ironic.
And that's something we want to be very sensitive to.
Yeah.
And there are tools that we can give you to help you write this out, but that's one of the bones of contention I've had with the VA. In order to prove we have PTSD, we almost have to have it in writing it. And they're aware of that.
Make you go through it yet again.
They make you go through one more time. But we will help you doing that. Now, there are some symptoms that you may have that someone says, oh, you have PTSD, and you don't. You could have had a traumatic brain injury where you were exposed to very loud concussive noises, or you were in a rollover accident, or you were in a training accident.
You got thrown from a truck.
Thrown from that, or you're in the escape and evasion, the SEER training, and you were hit about the head or thrown against the wall, and every time that you had the movement of the head hitting, it caused a cumulative effect of traumatic brain injury, and TBI is the short form for that. But there are some symptoms of TBI that are also in PTSD.
And very often, VA will award you one or the other and say, you only have the one, but not both. And in fact, they are separate issues.
For instance, anger. Do any of you have anger issues? Do any of you have short-term memory issues? What? Short-term memory issues. Do any of you have sleep issues? And that's not just sleep apnea, but you have a hard time falling asleep and you wake up very easily. And those are symptoms that are in both PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and it's possible to have both.
That's right. In fact, we have one veteran where we got an award for both TBI and PTSD. And again, that was one where we spent some considerable time working with them to get the statements, craft those statements.
And in talking with some of the people, they don't even think of the term traumatic brain injury until I notice, oh, you were airborne. How many times did you jump out of a perfectly safe airplane and have soft landings all the time? And they'll invariably laugh. And they say, oh yeah, there's a couple of real hard landings. And then afterwards what happened? Well, I was really dazed at the time, or sometimes they could have been even knocked out. And yet, they had to soldier on. And then what did they do if they, had issues? Well, they went to the medic, and the medic gave them Motrin 800 and soldier on.
And that's not necessarily going to show up on the record. And it's especially problematic for combat situations where something like that happens. You take the Motrin or whatever the medic gives you, and you just move on, and there's no record of this. You can you hit the deck all these multiple times wearing 80 pounds of gear, and there's nothing really to record all this. So that's where there's what's known as the combat rule, which gives a veteran in combat the benefit of the doubt on some of these issues, and that's written into law. I think.
And one of the things that really is helpful is the person, if they have a combat action badge or a combat infantry badge, there are other type of ones.
Combat medic.
Medics, yes.
Yeah.
Medics are the hardest ones that we've had to work with, because who do they report it to? They are the doc in the group, and they're in the forward operating bases, and they self-medicated themselves and moved on so they could help the other.
So that's one of the things, as we look through your record, we can look for that sort of thing. I mean, somebody comes in and they say they were infantry, then that automatically, we start thinking in certain terms, simply because we know what the infantry does. We can talk to them veteran to veteran and ask some of the questions. How many times you hit the deck? How many times were you blown up? How many times did something hit your head? Any number of those things.
And exposed to loud noises, and we often say, do you have persistent buzzing ringing in the ears? And they thought, well, of course I do. Don't most soldiers? Well, sadly, yes.
I mean, just about anyone who was in the infantry can be rated for tinnitus, and that's a 10% rating. It never gets any higher than 10%, but that's still $160 a month.
And that's the persistent buzzing ring in the ears. But listen carefully. If you have that persistent buzzing ringing in the ears, and you know you've had it since the service, and you don't have to be in combat. You could have been in AIT or basic, exposed to loud noises, unprotected noises, and you've had this ringing ever since. You need to make a claim for that. You are sent to an audiologist. Now here's where the rub is. You go to the audiologist, they put muffs over the ears, and you hear, it's a pure tone test, what limited hearing do you have? And they say, well, you have, acceptable hearing for a person your age, etc. But you need to advocate for yourself.
Yes.
You need to say, I am tired of this persistent buzzing and ringing in the ears. I never had it before I enlisted, but I have it every night. It's hard getting a good night's sleep. The audiologist can't hear that buzzing ringing in the ears. There is no medical test to hear that. But they listen to what you as a veteran is saying. And then in the audiologist report to the VA, they say that the person has tinnitus, most likely or more likely than not, due to unprotected ears or inadequate ear protection. Right. And some of you have been in vehicles where you couldn't wear the earplugs because you had missed the commands, and so the safety of the others were in peril. So you were exposed to loud noises. But you don't have to be in combat. We've had Air Force that were around jet engines. Mm-hmm. We've had medics that were around generators that were going day in and day night. Shipboard noises.
The military is a very noisy environment.
And there's an automatic 10%. And so, if we say, when we go through the head to toe, let's pick 3 of the claims. And we've had, literally, you weren't kidding when we said 17 different things.
And we used to do it that way, and we've suddenly realized this is not working for us or the veteran.
And this is taking so long. And yes, can they get, the maximum compensation? Yeah, but it may take 2 or 3 years, and we've been at this 5 to know that it can. But if we pick the 3 that are real easy, if you will, to get documentation, proof, all the things that we've been talking about, then let's go for those 3. And it's the 3 that's most important to you. But let's pick the one that's probably a real easy one. Tinnitus is one.
Mm-hmm. And try to get the idea of getting, most veterans are coming, a lot of the veterans we see come in, they can't work. They have problems adjusting, and they really don't have an income. So this is something important for us to get. I mean, this is all the result of the military service, and that's part, we always talk about how we'll care for the veterans. Well, this is what that really means, is taking care of this veteran who can no longer function the way he or she did prior to the military because of those experiences. And sometimes the veteran can you can be fully functional and still have these problems, but in both cases you want to try to get that compensation and get that care.
Well, this program is sponsored by Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109, the Rachel Corrie chapter in Olympia, Washington. And one of the things that we stand for is basically educating the people on what is the total cost of war. And Mark and I see this up front Fridays.
All the time.
All the time. It's not like, well, there went a tank or there went a vehicle or they have to replace those. Mm-hmm. But human beings, there is a cost to that. And Mark, sometimes you can say, well, hey, the service rented your body and mind for X number of years and now the rent's come due.
Exactly. And the other, lost that thought. But also, too, we want to talk. We talked about filing the claim.
Yes.
And so once you get all that in, then VA will review the record and make a decision. And
how do they make that decision? We send them the records, but where do those records go, and how do they decide?
They ultimately end up at the regional office. Like our regional office for Olympia is Seattle, although given the workload, sometimes they farm them out to regional offices that don't have as much of a workload. But there are decision rating specialists who will take that record, look at it, and make a decision. And then that will come back to you and say, we have made a decision, here's what it is. And it might be what you wanted, which is fine. It may not, may deny you, or they may give you like a minimal rating when you think, hey, I should really be at a higher rating.
One of the ways that we can get the rating the highest there, Mark and I subscribe to, and we personally pay for manuals that run us about $200 a year.
Yeah, something like that.
And this laws, regulations manual is about a $2.
Yeah, there's two of them. One's of all the laws and federal regulations, and there's a second one, I call it the how-to, which is put together by the National Veterans
2,000 pages each or something.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
the
huge.
National Veterans Legal Services Program. And that discusses the law, discusses the case, and has lots of veterans advocacy tips. You know, when filing this claim, be sure to do this, be sure to use this language. So as much as possible, we'll do that.
They also have what the ratings are.
Yeah.
And so what is a 30% rating? You look this up and you say, oh, you have an injury to your right knee, you have pain on motion, you have limited range. And so we take a look to see how disabling is this at 0%, which means it was service connected, but it's not disabling to where you can't work, all the way to 100%. And so we take a look at the language that the VA raters use. And so when we are working with a veteran, you know, we refer to it so that we can get a better idea, well, how disabling is this? Mm-hmm. Mark and I aren't medical doctors, but we are fairly skilled at trying to question to see how disabling is this injury and why is it important for you to get compensation for it.
And one thing to keep in mind about the compensation, as Dennis said, it's from 0 to 100%. At 30%, additional benefits kick in. You're suddenly, you now become priority, I think, 2 for health care at the VA. You're also entitled to a stipend for your spouse and children. So there are some good reasons why you might want to get 30%. But if it comes back, and particularly if they deny you, and you think you have a claim, then you want to appeal it. And that's something else that's changed with the new process. It used to be when the claim, we got that claim, we wanted to appeal, we'd file a notice of disagreement by writing a letter saying, we disagree. And then submitting, here's why we think your rating is wrong. Well, again, VA now has a new form, and I have that handy somewhere.
One of the things that we do while Mark's looking for the form is we ask, are you satisfied with the rating that the VA gave you? And if you're not, why not? You know, what has changed since you were last rated? And it can be 3, 4, 5 months or a year or more before you get the rating. And yes, your condition may have well changed. Mm-hmm. And so that rating shouldn't be at the 10%, it should be higher.
So there can be a variety of reasons why you would want to file to appeal it. And the first step is to file a notice of disagreement. And there's a form for that, which you fill out. And basically you tell them, well, list out what your issues of disagreement are. Typical issues are, that you disagree with them because you feel that evidence shows that you have this condition where they said you didn't, or that your the effective date. Sometimes there's a question about the effective date. Very often a veteran will apply and then be denied and not appeal it, and then come back and apply again and say, well, why don't you give it to me all the way back? Well, you didn't appeal it. Well, sometimes there's a way to get around that. So any basis you have, you would file this. And then you also, like with a claim, you have to say, here's the evidence, here's our support for why we disagree.
Now, we are not lawyers, but sometimes we often do investigative work like we are.
And we have to build a case like lawyers.
And we say, this is a clear and unmistakable error, CUE.
Although that's pretty rare. Those are hard to do.
Those are harder to do, and it's almost like we want to get legal help, and we do have sources that we get additional help ourselves as claims agents. But, it is possible that they did make an error.
Yeah. So depending on, what's in there, we can take a variety of sources. The one thing to keep in mind is if you do have to file a notice of disagreement, now you're into the appeals process. And this is where my suspicion is that VA has speeded up the claims process because they've cannibalized the appeals process. So I mentioned one appeal that's been going on for about 5 years. I have another one that's about 3 years. And when you talk to VA, when you call their representative to check on a claim, and if it's a new claim, they'll say, well, the average time is thus and such. When you talk to them about appeal, they say, we don't have that information. So they go on for a long time. So you have to be prepared to wait. But if if we do our homework correctly and build the case, when they finally do decide 5 years from now, they're going to pay you back 5 years because that's your effective date. Probably the biggest problem that veterans run into when it's denied, they just think, okay, I can't do anything, or don't know what to do, and they let it go. If you don't appeal within a year, then that claim is closed, and if you come back to file that claim again, they're going to just start from
the latest date.
Yeah.
Now there is a thing that bilateral is a term that is often missed by service organizations. Your injury, you says, well, is my right knee, but it could have been your left knee was affected. So bilateral means both parts. But there is a term called aggravation. And many times you may have experienced an injury that was to one part of your body, but in compensating for that injury, that left or the other part of your body is now injured. And yet your service medical records won't show anything at all about that part. Aggravation is a term, and that's where Mark and I, as independent accredited VA claims agents, can help you with that aggravated injury.
And along that same line is very often VA will say, well, you had this condition before you came into the service. Well, maybe you did, but your service made it worse.
And from the time that you got accepted,
which is after basic training, the service bought the entire body. Yeah.
And so, yes, the service may have aggravated, and so that's one of the things that we show. But the injury was not disabling to the point that you couldn't serve. And so aggravation is a key thing. And we have people saying, oh, yeah, I injured my right ankle or so, and so now what happened? Well, I started using my left leg.
So 20 years later.
20 years later, now I'm having arthritis problems and whatnot, and the left leg hurts, but there's no service medical record. So we say, okay, when we file it, we either say it's secondary to or aggravated by this particular injury, see the service medical record. And then you have a claim that covers both injuries, particularly if it's not a bilateral injury at the time.
Yeah, so over the years, I mean, we've seen quite a range of cases, of people, and I think it's definitely changed. And I think our process has gotten a little bit better. I mean, it's still a lot of work. And one thing that we would like to make a case for, which is we need help.
There are 7 independent VA claims agents that we last found by when we went online.
Yeah.
And from our knowledge, we're about the only 2 truly independent VA claims agent because we receive no compensation, nor do we ask for that.
Nope.
Others are often hired by a law firm. They get paid by the law firm, but the law firm gets paid only once the denial has come through, and then often they will take 20% of your claim.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've had a VA claims person, he came down with a huge amount of compensation back. The VA could have taken, well, $20,000, $30,000, or not the VA, but the lawyer could have taken $20,000, $30,000 less that person would have today, and yet we're saying, no, you have a right to that. Of course, we would say if you make get a sizable claim in, and you're compensated, the Coffee Strong, which is a GI-owned
Volunteer
organization, would appreciate a donation so that they can keep the doors open so that we can continue to provide the services.
And there may be a reason you want to use an attorney. I mean, they may have more resources than we do. They're not volunteers, so that's a judgment call. And in some cases, they may be far better, in a better position to argue some of the cases, particularly if you're talking about appeals to the Board of Veterans Appeals, or one step beyond that, which is the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, which is in fact a regular court. Dennis
and they have lawyers.
Yeah.
We can represent you there, but we would say, no, it's time that you best get a lawyer.
Although one of the cases I read recently was a woman who pursued it on her own all the way through the Court of Veterans Appeals and won, so it can be done.
It is possible. Now, rather than going through that whole appeals thing, Mark, you represented a person before the VA office in Seattle.
Right.
How did that happen?
Well, that was part of the appeals process. When you file a notice of disagreement, you can ask for what is called a de novo review, which is saying, basically, look again, see if you can get it right this time. And in that process, you can ask for a personal hearing. And that's what we did. We had the hearing, we went up, sat down with a decision review officer. She asked us questions, and we just talked about the case, and she was saying, well, you know, to prove this claim, I really need to see this sort of information. She was very helpful. And I don't know if she's typical of all the decision officers, but I was very impressed with the help that we got. And my veteran client said, well, I have that, I can submit it. And he did, and his claim, he had been denied, and we had filed an appeal for him, and about a year later we got this hearing, and he did get his compensation. So that worked.
And he got
very well.
the back compensation because of the earlier filing date.
The claim was still continuing.
So it can be a very long, lengthy, phase, or it can be a matter of several months type of thing. And the key thing is how well developed is your claim.
And I'd say I had a Vietnam veteran who came in and wanted to do a claim for PTSD, and it took a year to get everything together, but once we had it, I think he got that within, I want to say 3 months. I was shocked. So that tells me that, yeah, if we put together a well-developed claim, we can get a decision relatively quickly. Can't guarantee it, but it's certainly better than doing it piece by piece.
I served from 66 to 69, but I really can't find my proof that I served. How can I go about finding the proof? I'm sure there are other veterans that are watching that, oh yeah, I hear they wanted DD 214. I'm not sure how I go about doing this to prove that I really was in the service.
So that would be going back to the National Archives, using that standard form 180. Among the things you can check off is I want a DD 214. And I always recommend to my veterans, even if you have one, get another one. You can always use an extra copy.
And when you get that DD 214, take it to your county clerk and get it recorded there. Mine is recorded in the Snohomish County. because I remembered that, oh, you're supposed to do this. So if I ever lose that DD-214, they've got a recorded
Right.
copy. And that's needed if you need medical treatment or if you need the benefits.
I mean, that's the document. You know, that's
It's
the
all
key.
the benefits, and this is, you know, one of the books that, you know, that we, the VA has provided, because it's your benefits. And there's a lot of benefits, including education benefits, burial, widows, indemnity. There's a variety of services.
And
These
even
are
now,
all-
under the new GI Bill, even your children are eligible for some benefits.
Yes, and so one of the things that, as we're closing, we want to encourage our viewing audience that if you know a veteran that would benefit from receiving compensation for their service-connected injuries, both physical and mental health-wise, then send them our direction. And you know, the address is below at Coffee Strong, where we volunteer as independent VA claims agents, but we would also like to see more of you become claims agents, because there's many, many, many people waiting.
If you have the skills and the patience to do paperwork and are a good listener, I mean, those are probably the two key skills, thoroughness and documentation and being able to listen. Because more often than not, you know, you have to spend some time getting to know the veteran and understanding their story before you can really be an effective advocate.
Well, we want to thank our viewing audience for watching, Mark, and this has been an opportunity for the Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109, the Rachel Corrie chapter in Olympia, Washington, to share with you concerns that we have for veterans. We want to thank you for watching.
Soldiers, speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their future.